In this lesson in target states, I can identify congruent figures and use congruence to solve problems. First thing we need to remember is, what does it mean to be congruent? Congruent means equal or the same. So take a look at these two rectangles. At first glance, do you think they look congruent? Well, they have all equal angles. Does that make them congruent? What else would they need? Well, if we put them side by side or next to each other, you can see they're pretty close, but these two rectangles would not be congruent. All they have are right angles. All angles are the same, but the side lengths aren't the same. So these two figures are not congruent. In congruent figures, if all the corresponding sides and angles of two polygons are congruent, then the polygons are congruent. For triangles, if the corresponding sides are congruent, then the corresponding angles will also be congruent. This is called the side-by-side rule. So this lesson deals with polygons and triangles. And for triangles, if the corresponding sides are congruent, then the corresponding angles will always be congruent, as I said in the first slide. This is called the side-by-side rule. Because of this rule, when determining whether triangles are congruent, you only need to determine whether the sides are congruent. A helpful hint: congruent figures have a scale factor of 1. That means if you have two figures, one won't be larger or smaller than the other one. A scale factor of 1, if you multiply something by 1, it equals itself. So take a look at the two triangles below. A common question would be, decide whether the triangles are congruent. So the side lengths are listed. AC equals 3, AB equals 4, BC equals 5. And on the other triangle, the sides are 3, 4, 5. So these two triangles would be congruent. And all of their angles would be equal. So this angle would equal this angle. The right angles would be equal because it's a right triangle. And this angle would equal this angle. So we would know the angle measurements are also congruent. There are several ways to prove if triangles are congruent. So if 3 sides of one triangle are congruent to 3 sides of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. If 2 sides and the included angle of one triangle are congruent to 2 sides and the included angle of another triangle, then the two triangles are congruent. So if you have 2 sides and an angle and they're congruent, then those two triangles would be congruent. Lastly, if 2 angles and the included side of one triangle are congruent to 2 angles and the included side of another triangle, so if you have 2 angles and an included side, and those angles and that side are congruent, then the two triangles would be congruent. So you can become better at spotting congruent figures. Can you spot congruent figures in the shapes below? Take a look at number 1. Looks like a Chinese checkerboard. Can you spot congruent figures? It looks like I can. I think that these triangles would all be congruent. So yes, there are congruent figures in here. Any other shapes? Not really. The center shape doesn't really have another figure that matches it. So these triangles would all be congruent. What about in the kite? Would this triangle above be congruent? Let's put these skills to the test. You try. Click pause and try these 4 problems in your notebook. When you're done, click play to check your answers. For numbers 1 and 2, decide if the two figures are congruent and provide evidence that supports if they are. For numbers 3 and 4, use the congruence of each figure to find the missing part or variable. So click pause and try these 4 problems. Click play to check your answers. So number 1, are these two triangles congruent? Well, if you look at the sides, we have 4, 5, and 6. The other triangle has sides of 4, 5, and 6. So yes, they are congruent because all 3 sides are equal. For number 2, are these two triangles congruent? Well, this triangle is 6, 7, and 8. And the other triangle is 7, 8, and 5. So These two sides are not congruent, so no. All three sides are not equal. For number 3, if these two triangles are congruent, you know all the sides are the same length. And if all the sides are the same length, remember that all the angles are then equal. So the 88-degree angle over here, and the 88-degree angle over here, and the 56-degree angle over here, and 56-degree angle over here, that means x would equal 36. This is how you can use congruence to solve problems. For number 4, it's a polygon, and they're congruent. All the sides are equal. So what side would match up with A? So this side is 3, this side is 3, 3.5 and 3.5, 2.5 and 2.5, 2 and 2, that leaves another side of 2.5 for A. So A would equal 2.5. Good job.